Welcome to another episode of Crithit Coffee Break. Today, we're going to be tackling another part of Gaming and Escapism. For those not in the know, I'm Arlyeon, and I'm here with Shrimp.
Hey.
As well as a number of guests, including Moral Truth.
Greetings.
Alzorath.
Hello.
And Shado Temple.
Hello, hello.
So, if we need to sort of kick this off, I suppose the first thing we can just sort of do is provide a slight bit of context. In this case, we'll just sort of touch on the general definition, I suppose, of escapism, since that sort of helps as a fundamental stepping stone.
Also, should we have them introduce themselves a little bit?
Oh. Yeah, that probably
Just like a
would have
brief
helped.
Yeah, just a brief
Note
intro.
to future Shrimp.
Who are we? What do we do?
Yeah, good point.
My pants.
I mean, I follow you guys, but that doesn't help them. And we are gonna... Okay, yeah, okay. Note to future Shrimp and future Carrot, whichever one or both of you that are dealing with this. Or
Actually,
Nano.
we could have them introduce and we just cut that part or
I said
something.
we could just do it now. The magic of audio editing.
Yeah, I know, right?
I know, right? Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, Moral, do your intro.
Hello, everybody. I am Moral Truth. I make, I do vlogs. I host my own podcast as well, and I live stream games.
There will be totally links to his stuff in, like, the description.
And yeah, I'm also a bearer of positive vibes. You know?
Dude.
He's gonna be, like, the happiest one in the Gloomcast. It's gonna be Alzorath.
Me?
Yeah, it's you now. Introduce
I'm
your
just
shit.
batshit crazy. It doesn't really help much.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I mean,
So what do you do in your craziness?
where is it posted? What do you do? Do we need a restraining order?
No, you just need to subscribe, like, and follow.
Where at?
YouTube.
There we go.
Links are in the description below.
All right, and Shirley Temple, Shado Temple.
Shirley Temple.
Animal crackers in my soup. Oh, hey, I'm Shado Temple. I am a variety broadcaster on Twitch, and as well as a voice actor when I fancy it, I suppose.
And I believe you
And
also
people
do
will
have a
give me stuff.
YouTube.
I do, but it's Twitch. Twitch is my thing, more or less.
Voice
Literally,
acting's fun.
YouTube is there.
I do it
and there's some
occasionally.
things. But yeah,
All right. He does a cooking show too, guys. Like, I actually watch that just because I need to watch people make food. It's a thing.
it's fun.
It is a thing.
and me and Arlyeon are Crit Hit. If you don't know where to find us, I don't know what to tell you.
I mean, they're on this page though.
I think they already found you.
Maybe.
If they've made it this far and they're not listening, or they're listening and they don't know who you are, this is a strange world.
Maybe we
It's
have
very
like
weird.
we could have Alzorath's problem because he mentioned there's like this like Russian bot that like redoes his videos. Well, redoes.
No, there's a Russian bot that steals my names. There's a random, I don't know where the heck it's from, bot that steals my thumbnails and my descriptions and puts them on Total Biscuit videos.
Right, that.
Wow.
So maybe we'll end up with that. They'll steal someone's thumbnails and put it over our audio over someone else's video. Yeah.
It's really weird.
What kind of sorcery is this?
And it's more than one video.
Yeah, no, they didn't like do this to his channel, I guess, and make that sweet cash off it. Okay though, with yeah, okay, we're at Crit Hit. Definitely at this site, hopefully, that you found us. Links are also in the description, unless we've been chatbotted. The description is just like, I guess, Comic Sans or symbols or something of something.
So you're saying you're not on Daily Motion?
Or RedTube. We are not on RedTube.
Oh dear. I mean, that's a good thing, right?
Yes,
Nah,
moral.
we
you
should probably
sweet summer
expand.
Oh, dear God.
God, Jesus.
No, don't corrupt me. Come on.
Moral, you sweet summer child who actually probably doesn't know what RedTube is. No, it's good we're not there. Damn it.
And now
I
that
just
we've
killed my
escaped
thought.
into
The definition.
distractions.
Right. I mean, we're sort of,
Hey,
you
what are
know,
we talking about?
escapism, and we definitely went down the rabbit hole there for a moment.
We
Which is-
escaped from the podcast.
Yeah. Escapism is the tendency to seek distractions and relief from unpleasant realities, especially by seeking entertainment or engaging in fantasy. And it's just frequently a way of avoiding things that are unpleasant, boring, or the like. Doesn't necessarily have to be painful, though. In this particular case, with that in mind, I was sort of putting forward, originally someone to put forward the idea that not necessarily all gaming is escapist, which I was like, nah bro, by its definition, gaming is escapist, is my thought. Though, this whole subject...
Most forms of entertainment are.
Yes, concurred. But if there's anything anyone would actually like to touch on this to kick this off, I open the floor to you, especially since, just as like a brief thing, part of the reason this podcast actually came to be is because there is a lot of things related to gaming addiction syndrome now and the like. Is it syndrome or is it...
I forget whether it's syndrome in the Who thing.
Yeah, it's actually been it's actually
It's on the template for the future release.
online
I don't know if it's
gaming
actually-
symptoms. Yeah, it's an addiction apparently, which I found interesting, and so it sort of brought in that thing of escapism and what it is. But yeah,
They're listing it as a disorder.
yep,
to be
online
specific.
gaming disorder. There we go.
Which, I mean, to a quick point, you know, online or a gaming addiction is different from from escapism. Escapism is more of a broader category that can either be positive or negative.
Yes.
mm,
Whereas addiction, you are driven to do in an unreasonable manner.
Driven to do as well as or doing something to the detriment of the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Like, you know, disregarding basic human needs or disregarding things like your job or education and things of
Or
that
taking
nature.
a shower.
Yeah,
Right.
in order to instead engage in whatever that sort of thing is, whether it be drugs or some sort of activity, even gaming. I mean, there are people who are genuinely addicted to gaming.
Which, yeah, I mean, there's stuff that's meant to prey on that. Everything currently with that whole can of worms with EA and loot boxes is trying to prey on people who have addictive tendencies with gambling addictions and wrapping that up in the people who are, like, heavily enmeshed in gaming so they can just hook people
Oh, sure,
and, like...
for sure. But I would say I think it's unfair to declare that it's only EA that's doing such things.
Oh, no, they're just
pretty
a
much
very
as
noteworthy...
well, I should say.
Oh, yeah,
Free-to-play games rely on it almost exclusively.
I
And
mean,
I
I want
it's
you to
in
want that
Blizzard.
one more.
It's
Like
in...
quote free, unquote free.
Yeah,
Real quick,
they'll cover so.
For example, I mean, it comes in the games that you may not even necessarily even think about. You know, like I'm playing through Yakuza right now on my channel. Yakuza 0. Anybody playing that?
I've
No.
watched a bit of it.
Long time ago.
So in the game right now that I'm going through, there is a real estate royale mini game built within the game, where you are working your way through trying to take over this bit of land, right? And in order to do that, you're going around buying up bits of property and waiting for those bits of property to give up money on the part ownership that you have on it, and you use that money then to build off or buy more properties in order to keep kind of going back and forth and growing that up. And it's still, or even though it's part of a fully fulfilled game, and I paid full price for the game, it's still using those same practices. This idea of the Skinner box. I don't know if anybody's heard of that.
Yeah, no. The whole like give a reward, reinforce going back there to do a thing.
Exactly. It doesn't necessarily have to be free to play. It doesn't have to be loot boxes. It doesn't even have to be monetary. It can be something that is in a game that you love dearly and paid full price and didn't have to pay an extra cent for. These practices are all over gaming. Truly.
I mean, isn't that actually inherent in a lot of game design now? It's just that small thing of providing those small, like, meaningful rewards that get people engaging in the game for longer.
Absolutely.
I mean,
make them feel like they've gotten enough out of their investment by purchasing the game.
Yeah, my big issue with loot boxes is, like, the gambling cash grippy thing, and barring, like, normal progress sometimes behind things that rely on, like, gachapons, which drives me nuts.
But I'm not really sure the gambling part of it fits into the escapism.
No,
It's more
that
of
was
just it exploits people who rely
I
on
mean, yeah, it kind of goes
that
back
game
to
of
like,
chance.
addictions.
Yeah, no, it goes to because it's people who have because addiction. There are people who have addictive personalities who are more likely to fall into certain things that feel rewarding. Because it provides you that rush. There's a dopamine rush that's provided to you. Same as like with gaming, where it provides that rewarding experience. You then have those higher risk things, which do so as well. Which is so praise on those people. It prays the most on those people who have proclivities towards that, and because we subjectively sort of put people through our own lenses, though. Part of my issue with the whole gaming addiction thing is I feel like a lot of people are going to get lumped into that. When, yeah, they may be putting a lot of time into a game or something, but that's because their current situation might be like a complete train wreck and it's their coping mechanism, which...
I personally disagree with listing video game as an addiction, mainly because it's... Where would you draw the line between a bibliophile and somebody who's reading addicted? It's hard to figure that thing, and it's similar with gaming, movies, etc. So
I think it kind of plays into doing a little bit of research on this before getting in here. There's kind of a line you need to draw between compulsion and addiction, because games inherently aren't addicting. They don't have any sort of ability to actually influence your mind in such a way that it like changes the chemicals that you deal with, forcing your body to desire it. But games are compelling, and that sort of draw can be something that you actively search for and try to maybe fill some hole in your life that is otherwise wanting for something. And that compulsion towards the game, by itself is okay, but it's when it becomes a detriment to your own life that it becomes an addiction, where you choose that over something that was important to the basic function of your life. That's when it becomes an addiction. At least that's kind of where I've been reading.
Which, supporting point, like, there are instances of people who've not eaten, gone to the bathroom, or slept for multiple days to, like, binge a game. Which,
or many games.
Excessively, and then died. There's been cases of people just, like, binging it until they died, but that is, I would think, more of the fringe thing than...
That'd be an extreme fringe too.
Yeah. That's what gets the headlines. Obviously, someone living in an internet cafe in China who just played a game until they literally dropped. And there's something to be said about that too. Obviously, that there are people who will get so addicted to something like that, and it could have been something else too.
It also says something about the cafe that they enabled and like let that happen.
One of my worries with it getting listed as a proper addiction is also that it might cover up research into other potential psychiatric disorders that are kind of fueled by these small dopamine releases from the small rewards that people get from something simple as a game. Yeah, you want a level of Candy Crush, but for someone else, that little bit of brain chemicals is like, ooh, I want to win another.
Yeah. I think it also actually depends on people's, like, affinity for the game, though, because that's what gets people continuing to go, is if they can maintain that to a degree. Though some people just
Right.
like throwing themselves at things that are frustrating. Candy Crush also does have that whole pay element
Skinner
to
box.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. But one thing you'll notice is that in some of these games, like let's take World of Warcraft, since we were talking about the Chinese cafe thing.
Yeah, okay.
You'll notice that as you go further along, the gap between the rewards slowly increments up longer and longer and longer and longer. That extra level takes longer to get.
There's
And
another
therefore
term for
people will
that.
they'll invest that little bit more time to try to get the same amount of release. They're just
sounds
always
like
chasing
like
the high.
you're stuck on
re-
that grind fest in a way.
It's another psychology thing, but it's when there is a stable relationship between the rewards you get and the actions you do, you are more likely to stop doing it if that reward doesn't come to you. If it's always the reward at a very set time, you are very likely to discontinue the practice once you once it stops giving you rewards. If the action rewarded you things in like a semi-stable but infrequent manner, though, like because they tested this with birds, of like putting them in like basically a Skinner box and having it.
That was, for what it's worth, that was the Skinner box experiment, was putting pigeons in boxes with buttons. That was done by the psychologist Skinner.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what the actual term is for the infrequent one.
The idea is essentially timed conditioning. The
Yeah,
idea that
but
if-
it was the timed conditioning where it had the reward that wasn't stable. Because it was like stable reward had low retention. Because as soon as you break that pattern, they're like, oh, but if the pattern is somewhat arbitrary, then they'll like continue poking at that button long after it's not giving anything. Because in past, it would occasionally spit one up after like a random amount of time. So I feel like MMOs and stuff with that slow gap, they sort of provide people that thing of it is infrequent and you can't necessarily be sure, but there's going to be something if you keep going.
it also helped hold them in longer, so they have to give fewer rewards as you go along.
Yeah.
That is also a big play there.
Yeah, that's like the first time I've heard of that experiment, actually.
I
Um,
recommend, not that I'm advertising for anybody else's channel, but Extra Credits on YouTube does an excellent, just like 6 to 8 minute video explaining precisely what the Skinner box is and what sort of effects it has on gaming and what sort of things that like cause mobile developers to hire more psychologists than game developers. It's a whole thing.
Yeah, there's a lot of games that actually have interesting practices like that and trying to figure out how to hook people for the longest, what practices they can, like a lot of it is trying to figure out what is the point that they can push players to for the optimal amount to gain like the best retention among players for doing a certain like actions, and figuring that out for the majority of people is, yeah, like Shado said, where some of their hiring priorities come from.
Yeah, actually, like I went to I think it was a panel at MagFest a couple years back that had several psychologists and game developers on the panel discussing the fact that game developers are actually allowed to essentially run psychological tests and experiments on gamers that are playing the games. They're allowed to collect all that data that's coming in from, say World of Warcraft and things of that nature, and they can use that to understand their player base more or better, and then adapt their systems to make sure that they fit the sort of psych profile that has been assembled based on the information that they receive. And it's actually easier for them to conduct those experiments than it is for actual scientists to set up human experiments, because there's a lot of red tape, understandably so. You don't want people doing unethical social experiments
Like the
for the
prison
sake of
simulation
science.
experiment.
Yeah,
You
you
want a
can't.
second Harry Harlow.
Yeah, but it's because of just kind of how the industry is set up. A lot of these developers and publishers can actually just take that information and play those games. That is to say, these social experiment games, and not really have to report anything. Actually, as soon as they make that information public, that's when they have to start dealing with the red tape that causes them to, have to actually pay attention to the ethics behind the information and mechanics that they change. Fun.
Yeah.
It's good stuff, and this is exactly what I was going to school for the longest time.
But
To experiment on people.
No, I was a social service worker to understand people, and then experiment on them.
But not to dominate the conversation, but one thing that you do want to kind of connect with this is the escapism kind of portion or component to this. That, you know, we keep talking about what sort of games can do to compel or to make them compelling to play, sometimes less ethically than others. But there's also just an element of escapism which can still play into that world of compulsion, if you want to get into that at all.
I mean, I can, like, I would probably say in a very bad spot years ago, and I talked about this on, like, another video, but, like, I was huge into a game. Like, I binged that thing, like, 12 to 14 hours a day, because I was, like, undiagnosed and like, massive, like, clinical depression. And the only happy spot I had in my life at that point in time was, like, this fucking video game and the friends that I didn't have in real life who were on this game, and, like, the fact that it had these mechanics and things that made me sort of, like, nostalgic for a lot of bits of, like, my childhood when things weren't, like, a complete train wreck. And so there was a lot of components to it that sort of drew me in. It was the social aspect, I feel, that really kept me there, but in staying there, it led to a number of, like, unhealthy habits.
You found a place of comfort and only came out of necessity, pretty much.
Yeah, and I mean, my situation was not great. Like, I was a former street kid who was literally living in a slum. There are slums in Canada, I'm not joking. Example of the fact that it was a slum, at one point my ceiling caved in because of the weight of the hornet's nest in it, caused my ceiling to collapse. And then my room was full of hornets. So that, you know, slum, that was my day-to-day life. Also having to deal with two people who, like, moved into, like, the house/apartment unit I was living in, who were dealing meth out of it and getting my life threatened on, like, a semi-constant basis. Yeah, the game was a very nice, safe place with friends who weren't murderous. Which is, I guess, part of my issue with the addiction thing, because it's like, I did not know how to get myself into a better situation, especially, like, in the state I was. I was this...
Then you have to stop and think, that was part of actually a survival mechanism more than necessarily a bad thing. It kept your mind from going really bad places, because if you wouldn't have had something to escape with, you might have actually turned to the dealers to actually...
Oh, no, I probably would have, like, tried to brain one of them with a crowbar. Because they, threatened me and my friends on multiple occasions. So, to be fair, too, I actually had someone break into my room, which is why there was a crowbar behind my door. Like, yeah, no, it was not a good place, and that's part of my issue with the term of addiction, is because it became, like, I can get why it would be, as an outside person looking in, they would see addiction. I saw coping mechanism and refuge, and when things got crappy, I actually just dropped it. But at the same time, while I was in there, I was, like, fully immersed. And I still, like, I came back to it years later when a different company got ownership of it. But I did not have the best habits while in there. It was partly the house, the lack of privacy to myself, the fact that leaving my room meant I had to deal with, like, potentially threatening people. Okay, literally threatening people.
Yeah, I was about to say.
Yeah, yeah, what?
Meth dealers are not fun.
Oh yeah, or drunks. One of them in the first of the slum. I lived in 2 slums back to back. Anyways, the first slum, I had a dude like sit outside my like room and just scratch at the door, being like, "Come out and play." And I was just like, "Oh my god, it's Clockwork Orange. I'm done." Locking the door.
Float down here.
Pushing my like drawer, my like dresser drawer in front of the door, and I was just like, check. I have enough like Mr. Noodle and like bok choy to last me a few days. I'll just eat shitty Mr. Noodle and like bok choy, and it was winter, so I had like a really ghetto fridge. If I opened the window and had like hollowed out a snowbank in front of it, and had like eggs and like meat there and a bottle of wine. It's good. Yeah. No, but you know, unhealthy habits. I could not properly confront or deal with people in real life. It was just terrifying to me, and I think most people would have eventually hit a breaking point where they went like, "No, I'm good. I'm outie. I'll go homeless again rather than this. I'll like deal with you guys." I tried. It didn't work well. I mean, I called the cops on the guy, and it didn't go well. They dropped him off the next day. Carrot, if any of this gets too weird, or like awful or TMI, just edit it out. Or Nano, whichever.
I think it sounds fine so far. Especially your cool, creative refrigerator.
I mean, I'm proud of the refrigerator. It's the most ghetto system ever, but it was like actually hilariously awesome.
Yeah, it is.
So here's actually an interesting point. Not to derail your story here, and it
No,
is an
please
important
take
story
over.
at that. But it's interesting because one thing that you brought up there that comes up actually a lot in the kind of literature that I read leading up to this was that typically a lot of people who get compelled into gaming such that it becomes an addictive sort of activity in their life, to the detriment of other things, is that they frequently run into a situation where they have talents, abilities, and skills that they value. Say someone you're feeling that you're intelligent, you're smart, you can do certain things correctly, and the real world not rewarding those efforts. For example, to you turning in this drug dealer into the police and them not, doing conceivably anything about it. Or maybe other things in your life, having to deal with living in a kind of a slummy place. Those sort of things are typically major kind of, for a word, because it's appropriate, triggers to get someone into approaching a world that allows them to escape. This idea of joining and interacting with an entire environment and place that does reward those things. There's no game that there's no game that you're like applying for a job and you didn't get it because someone didn't read your resume, right? Yeah. Every time that your actions in a video game, at least the ones that you enjoy and love and cherish and get yourself hooked into, are the type of games where your direct actions have direct effects on the world and are rewarded as you see appropriate. There's never a time where it's like, well, that was a useless thing, and if it is, then it's a game you probably didn't like a whole lot for that reason. And that is right there, that sort of feeling of reward in exchange for the things that you are doing in a consistent manner compared to, say, the rest of real life, is a real quick way to get people addicted into that kind of world. It's not the fault of the game. The game has always been that way, and good games have been conditioned to do those things because people like those things. But it is that sort of environment that can bring people in to, well, be addicted.
So that's a pretty fair point.
And I think it might be a higher risk of that kind of thing with some of these games where there is no proper end. Like where you can just keep playing on forever and ever and ever.
Things.
Sandbox games, yeah, like you said, like World of Warcraft there's an end to the story, but you can still do another raid, you can still go out with people, still do all these other things. Whereas games like, say, the old Final Fantasies, you have a lot of the old Metroidvanias, once you reach a certain point, that game is over. So your addiction to it, in a way, ends. You need to find another different high, because it just won't return the same rewards playing it again and again and again for most people. So
True enough.
Yeah, I think that's part of why like Dark Souls is such a huge thing for a lot of people too, is because it has that new game plus, that new challenge, that it gives you a lot of what you already went in for, what you really enjoyed, but amplifies it so it still poses a challenge, and with some of them even like reshuffles things slightly so there's new things to discover, and it provides that hook for people to stay, as opposed to just like with Final Fantasy VII, you beat the game, the one thing you can do is maybe like load up an old save and go hunt down the weapons if you didn't kill them all. Breed a chocobo.
I don't know if you guys have noticed, I wager most people have, but the massive influx of all these games touting replayability, roguelike, randomized, procedural generate, all this other stuff.
Yep.
It's specifically to take advantage of that, so.
Yeah, and one thing I do want to throw in real quick, because I saw it mentioned earlier in the chat we were having prior to this, that I think it was you, Arlyeon, that said that you don't find Dark Souls to be very empowering.
That was Chariot Rider.
That was Chariot Rider. Sorry.
I quoted him. I actually countered that point and said that whilst it's a more gradual process, it still does technically fall under empowerment. It does give a much more brutal, you are very fragile, this world will kill you. It's like the very old school NES, like, you're gonna die a lot, get good.
Well, there's also the whole aspect of it doesn't necessarily have to be a power fantasy to be escapist either. Some people would be doing that to challenge themselves. They feel they're not challenged in their day-to-day life, so therefore they go and get good as a challenge.
For sure. And I would say, even to extend on that, though, like, as you get good, you are still rewarded for getting good.
Yes.
That is still something that people are pursuing that maybe they aren't necessarily getting in their real lives. That, maybe they are outperforming their peers at their job, but they aren't the ones getting promoted because they didn't go hang out at a soccer game, 1 week or something.
A pub after work, yada.
And so they instead return to these games that are like, hey, if you put in the work, we'll reward you appropriately. Always. We'll make sure that the kind of effort that you put in is always given the credit it deserves, and that is a very alluring sort of thing.
And I mean, touching on this for different senses of like escapism, because again, we're searching the things we are missing, and a big thing that I think I was missing prior was like a sense of security, that's like safety, and that was there, and like a sense of community and this place that I was not going to deal with like immediate stuff. But another thing, and I mentioned this in an earlier cast, but it's also really pertinent because you're sort of about this, is that sense of wonder and like a world that I can discover. So there's things about like those exploratory games and tabletop that are really big because they give you that creative freedom. Like as a medium, a lot of these sandboxy games and like tabletop games and some RPGs just allow players a large amount of creative freedom in how they tackle things, and like even being a part of world building. And that's something a lot of people don't necessarily get in their day-to-day life.
Yeah, because most things are already discovered.
Or at least the easy things are.
Yeah.
There are a lot of things yet to discover, but the kind of the level of effort needed to put in to find any sort of new discoveries these days is a lot higher than buying a $60 game and exploring a billion worlds.
Yeah.
And helping build them. There's
Those
that constructive aspect to it that I think is also lacking, because it's one thing to behold other people's works and be in awe. It's another thing to have had your hand at creating something.
Right, like if you look into games like maybe like Minecraft or Terraria or any of those open world games where you can pretty much create anything. Yeah, that's kind of like what I think of it. Like I mostly played Terraria. Like I've been mostly about like building stuff and then like collecting resources to actually like build the things I want. And you know, it just feels good to like create like your own, like creating a world or like your own world, and then you feel like the sense of security in a way.
Wasn't someone building a Death Star in Minecraft? Like, let's point out like how much time and effort that would take. Or like
That would take like several hours.
The people building Middle Earth.
yeah, like that stuff takes years, to be quite fair. Like when people build like these like accurate representations of these things, these like creative endeavors that take years and dedication and devotion, that says something about people's want to create something, and then this being their outlet to do so.
Yeah, and with regards to Minecraft, if you're wondering if whether or not something's been built, I think it's at this point kind of akin to both porn and The Simpsons. It's been done.
Well,
Everyone has that one
Okay,
golden
then.
penis. You know that.
Yep.
oh boy.
Head over to Rule 34 and out.
Yeah, where we just like take a quick break to Rule 34 the names of everyone in this chat.
Telling you, there's someone has taken the time to do and act out just about anything. But not to derail this, of course. Yeah, I mean, and having that sort of creative freedom can be very rewarding, but also, again, kind of getting back to this idea of if you take that reward and you accept that more into your life than, say, other personal responsibilities that otherwise keep you alive, that's when it starts to become a bit of a problem, you know?
I mean,
Yeah, going back to what you were saying, Shadow, like if you're like playing games and then it gets to the point where you're ignoring everything else like in the outside world, like you're forgetting about school or you're forgetting about work or any of your other personal responsibilities, then that's what I would think, that it gets to the point where it becomes an addiction.
Yeah.
But if you're like balancing your time between like your personal activities and like playing games, then I would say it's a bit more of like a distraction, like from like kind of like what Arlyeon said, like as like a way of a coping mechanism, like to distract yourself from other bad things that are going on in your life.
Definitely, and I think it's important to have coping mechanisms for a lot of things that happen negatively in our lives. But yeah, you know, again, the whole idea of like someone who played a game until they died is a very popular thing to kind of play off of. And, you know, I think the gaming community as a whole just kind of wholesale rejects the idea of gaming addiction because they're concerned that any sort of, you know, compulsion in playing this game and playing games could be considered addiction, and people might take steps to prevent that from
I mean, they're
those
already
people from continuing to play.
trying to aim at the gaming community
Oh,
right
yeah,
now.
for sure. But I think at the same time, it's important for us as gamers in the gaming community to
Acknowledge that there's things
still
there.
still respect that it is a problem, you know, and it's something that we as a community should be aware of and not, you know, belittle, and something that we also can probably work towards taking care of and taking positive steps towards making sure it doesn't happen to people as much. You know, as a quick personal note, like I did okay in college. I squeezed by. I got the grades I needed, but I played games probably more than I needed to. But who didn't make it through was one of my roommates. Sophomore year of college, I roomed with somebody at a 4-year engineering school, and it was not an easy school by any means. A lot of people would drop out their freshman year, or say even up to their senior year. You'd only have like, you know, maybe two thirds to like 4/5 of the class make it through. And my roommate, he was not the best student, but he was earnest, and his intention was to eventually make it to be a developer at Valve. That was his big play. That was his big plan, and that's what he wanted to do. And as he got worse grades, because this is strain and stress of college gets to us all, and then eventually you start having some trouble with it.
Vicious cycle.
Rather than maybe seeking help in other ways, he would dig himself into games, and that's a great stress release. I did it plenty myself, and I still do it to this day. But the worse that his grades got, the more time he would spend gaming in order to offset those feelings. And as his grades got worse, he would spend more and more time playing games, to the point where he stopped going to class. He would spend his entire evening, mostly a lot of TF2, a lot of Team Fortress 2, which I was hooked on at the time myself, along with Minecraft here and there. And yeah, he would spend his entire evening playing TF2 and Minecraft, and then the morning would be asleep and sleep through all his classes. Unfortunately, about 3/4 of the way through sophomore year, which we were not at a cheap university by any means, he had to drop out. He failed too many classes. He didn't show up to others, and I don't know where he is these days. Honestly, he, for all I know, never got out of there. But
I had like a similar experience as well for me. I was like in my first year in university. Like it was like my first time like for a long period of time, being on my own rather than living at home with my folks. And I think it's got like much harder. Like at the time I was doing computer science as my major at the time.
that's what he was too.
Yeah, I had like when I went into university at first, I had like no experience with programming. So I was like thrown into that, and I was like, oh, I was thinking at first like why I wanted to get into computer science. I was like, like I'm kind of interested in computers, but I didn't really imagine myself programming. I just didn't. And then like the calculus and then like physics and all that stuff got like pretty hard. And then at that time, like I was still playing League of Legends, and then I would just play that. Like it started getting to the habit where like I just kept playing that. But it wasn't to the extent where like I stopped going to class and all that. It just became a coping mechanism at first, but then it just got to the point where it's like, oh, I needed to play that because like I had to cope with like pretty much everything going on in my life, and it didn't end up going too well for me. I had to my grades didn't end up going so well, so I had to withdraw from the university. And I'm actually, after that I went to community college. Now I spent like some years in community college, trying to get my stuff back together. And and this year, I'm gonna really get my associate's degree, but not in computer science. I changed majors after a while.
What'd you change to?
I switched to philosophy.
Oh.
Quite a flip there.
Yeah.
Yeah, the fact that most of us have some sort of story, either ourselves or someone we know who has dealt with this at some time or another, probably means that this is a bit of a problem.
Yeah, it kind of was like a wake-up call for me too. I ended up like quitting that game like completely. I straight up like uninstalled it. I never touched that game again.
And again, I think it's still very important that we have some place to escape to when life doesn't necessarily allows us to succeed in ways that we want it to. But yeah, it's a slippery slope,
Yeah.
I'll acknowledge like all of these points that are brought up. I suppose my thing here is and this is on the subject of like the main thematic thing, is I'm sometimes wondering if some of these cases aren't necessarily also compulsion. Well, they're compulsion, but not with something necessarily addictive at its root, but coping for other things like anxiety or depression, because wouldn't that make this gaming addiction syndrome more comorbid of existing things?
Oh, of course. None of this happens in a vacuum. Nobody's just stuck in a room with a game and like, well, here we go. This is my life now. It's
Right, yeah.
like life happens in a very large world filled with plenty of context for a lot of situations. But a lot of those situations kind of line up to almost predictable patterns, getting that idea of life has failed you in some way where this game has not.
But
Right.
That also,
Kind of like going back to like in college, you know, like most college students these days they have anxiety, and they have to find some sort of coping mechanism to deal with that. And some college students will go to games for that.
and other
I've
things
seen
too,
that.
though. Drinking,
Yeah.
drugs.
Oh yeah, or
sex,
drinking or
like
doing drugs.
it,
Yeah, and sex. Yeah.
There's
true.
a
And
lot
I know,
of
like, whenever, because I thought I had like a gaming addiction at one point, and I was like, well, things aren't going too great, and I gotta face the facts. I played too many games, so I decided I'm gonna quit games. Uninstalled my favorite game, and I wasn't too compelled to play the others, so I was off games for a long time. Then I noticed, like, now that I stopped playing games, I'm watching anime too much, so I quit that, and then I noticed now I just sleep for hours longer than I used to.
So now it's like you're
Places for all
sleeping too
flavors.
much.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's become a sleeping addiction. I'm just,
Yeah.
just kidding.
That's actually a part of, like, I'm not saying like this is depression, but like being down does result in people like oversleeping tremendously. That's a thing that happens. Some people have
for sure.
sleep
Oh yeah, for
disturbances.
sure. I mean that in the wrong way. I apologize.
No. I get you were cracking a joke. I was just like pointing out, like, it actually falls in line with like what we're talking about this in regards to the addiction thing, and if it is symptomatic, and that was the big thing that I actually wanted to touch on too, is I view this gaming addiction syndrome not as a problem per se, but as a symptom of a greater problem.
Oh, for sure. And that problem is depression.
And
Wasn't it mentioned earlier? Was gaming? It's not like more like it's more of a disorder. I think someone said
yes,
that earlier.
it's a disorder, but the fact that disorders will sort of happen in a vacuum at times. At least that's like how they're defined, I do believe.
Right, something's maybe a disorder or a disease or
Which
Something
It's a
of that
symptom
sort.
of
right,
If
of course.
any number of disorders, unfortunately. And I do go back to the point that I think focusing too much on the game specific rather than the behavior that leads to what we would call the addiction.
it is not going to help anyone.
Yeah.
And that's my argument there. Is
And a lot of people are going to want to restrict games specifically because it is the currently fashionable for a lot of
scapegoat.
people.
It's the fashionable scapegoat.
Well, it's also popular as the mechanism of escape. I mean, before the current generation, there were comic books, there were certain types of movies.
Saturday morning cartoons.
Yes. It's every generation has its things. For some generations, it was drinking, but
I was going to say, before that, it was just beer.
Yeah.
beer.
To that point, though, getting ideas with like alcohol and drugs and things of that nature, those obviously also have their own addicting properties, as does
Yes.
gambling, which
True.
kind of plays onto that as well. I would say gambling a little closer to connection to gaming than necessarily things where your actual chemical balance of your body's changed to want these things. But
Yeah, alcohol and smoking and stuff like that, physical addiction. So
Though
we have-
people stray towards those.
But we
because of-
have programs for alcoholism, for drug addiction, and for gambling addiction. But we don't have a lot in place for people who get so hooked on games that they don't really do anything else with their lives. Not in like the loser in his basement kind of idea, but the loser in his basement who stopped eating for a couple days, or talking to his girlfriend, or feeding his dog.
So
or
like,
things of that
or the
life
person who only
skills.
works enough so they can maintain their subscription to whatever game.
Right.
I
Right.
knew people who literally worked in game to maintain their subscription and rent.
Yep.
They
Pretty much.
They played the game to live their life.
And so my kind of thing with it is that, like, I would love to see more research into it. I want it to be concerned, because I think that if there's more research into it, there'd be ways of letting programs develop that would allow people to kind of figure this out. It's not. I don't think it's going to be necessarily a result of, well, we just gotta ban these damn things. We're not going to get into a game prohibition, because obviously everybody saw how that went. And it would be unenforceable to the highest degree. But I think it's still, just because there's that fear, that doesn't mean we can't address it, And to a real quick point, not to really kind of press on your own personal story at all, but in those days when you were, playing your games kind of living the slum life, not to make jokes or light of
No,
anything.
it's fair. I just, honestly, I would rather laugh at the shitty situations than weep about it in hindsight, because it makes it at least, like, tolerable.
Fair enough. And in those times you did use games to cope with that. That was a good way to kind of deal with the shitty hand you've been dealt. And you're in Canada, is that correct?
Yeah.
Which means you do have access to healthcare and things of that nature, right?
Yep.
As an honest question, I'm not trying to be trying to attack you or anything like this, but in the time that you were spending 12 to 14 hours playing games as opposed to whatever else you may be doing, how long do you think you were playing games to the point where you were neglecting? Because obviously at one point you did notice that it was a problem, but my wonder is at what point were you still playing games where you still knew it was a problem, where games may have been something that you continued to use as your crutch as opposed to, say, seeking medical help for the sort of things that were going on in your life?
So, healthcare addresses a lot of things that are physical here, but when it came to anything involving, like, my depression or everything, I was making applications and in the system for 10 years. Took me 10 years of applications to actually get approved. Just so you know.
Yeah,
Sounds about like how helpful my health insurance is here.
And that's an interesting point. You could say that it is a larger failure of society to address these concerns, and as a result, you've had to kind of find your own methods of coping. But and certainly in your case, this was kind of your thing until you finally were able to seek help where you found it, or did you never receive help to begin with? I'm not actually sure of your situation.
So in my case, hey Lovi.
Yes.
It was December or a little bit earlier, like September.
September.
So it was this September that I was actually finally able to properly, fully get acknowledged as having PTSD, depression, and anxiety. I'd been diagnosed with, like, ADHD that was severe enough the army rejected me over it, actually. So I would have been an army cook. I passed everything other than their mental test. And then the time I didn't mention I had ADHD, they realized I had depression and tossed that onto my file. I was like, well, fuck.
And it's extremely frustrating that a government entity was aware of that enough to prevent you from working for them, but not point to where they understood you needed that assistance.
Yeah.
And that, again, kind of comes out to this larger kind of point of society doesn't deal well with mental issues yet because we're not ready to face it. We don't like the idea of the fact that, well, maybe we do actually need a lot more help than we are currently getting.
I think it's something they need to be aware of, though, because when we're heading, like, industrialization brings about people being alienated from their values. Jobs that we used to be able to do lose their value. People are unpersoned from, like, what they know, from what they did and defined themselves. We're, like, right now looking into automating burger flipping jobs, which is going to result in, like, potentially, if that takes off, how many people are going to lose their job, how they maintain their status quo. And that sort of will bring about the whole, like, I mentioned this too, but, like, you're pretty savvy psych-wise, so are you familiar with Anomi?
Not particularly, no.
It was the whole thing where, like, depression, suicide sort of surged up when you had the beginning of industrialization, because all of these people whose jobs are being replaced by the, like, industry now don't have clientele, don't have the ability to keep up with the whole production of, like, things en masse, etc. So they lost their way of life and
Lost a sense of purpose.
And with that, their will to live.
Yeah, and as we're coming on to another kind of age of automation past the point of just mechanization, which I saw you post the video of humans need not apply on the conversation. Which, by the way, if you guys haven't seen, both people in this conversation right now and whoever's listening to this at large, go watch that, because man,
It's good.
It's a thing, and we don't really have a solution to it because we're just under the assumption that all the things that we've been doing so far will just continue to work, and making changes are going to be so like just life, like paradigm shifting, that it's going to like take a lot of effort, a lot more effort that I think people are willing to go through, because the status quo still kind of works. It doesn't necessarily work for all people. In fact, it's working less and less for more and more people.
It works for
But
those people who are in power, however.
it's a lot easier to keep the status quo going than to induce massive change.
Also,
And
pause
so-
for a second.
Yeah.
You're slightly crackly right now. Just very
Am I?
slightly.
Let me work on that.
So, and yeah, for those of you who are actually going to go out and look for that video, it's a CGP grade video, by the way. Humans
Just
need not
link it
apply.
in the description. Seriously, we can just link it in the description. I don't give a shit about plugging someone else's work if it's pertinent to the conversation. It helps the conversation, and you know what? Let's give them props for making something good and relevant.
Yeah. Or as one of YouTube's little weird eye things, if someone remembers to go into that much detail. But also, I noticed some of us are running out of time a bit, and the conversation is going pretty well. But I guess we should start wrapping it up.
Yeah, you guys are free to keep talking if you like, but I do have to jet, unfortunately. But this has been a fascinating conversation, because, yeah, I mean,
I
it's a
enjoyed
field
your
that doesn't...
input,
that?
honestly. I enjoyed your input a lot, and I mean, yeah, it's an interesting thing, because people are like, don't you guys have free healthcare? Like, how did this happen? And I was like, still have paperwork, and mental health is still, like, a lot less understood than... Which is why I'm, like, arguing for the comorbidity thing, is because if gaming hadn't been there, I would have escaped into something else. I can basically guarantee it.
The Canadian dream is dead.
Wow.
And
Wow.
frankly, there really aren't many countries right now that do handle mental health care very well. There's a few, but
Small Scandinavian countries where low populations make it easy to make massive changes.
To be fair, knowing me, I probably would have escaped into books, and then maybe tabletop, but mostly books.
Yeah,
I would
and
have escaped into movies.
I think the big play to take home is that gaming is a unique, can still be a pretty uniquely interactive and compelling thing.
Oh yeah, because
Even-
it hooks you hard.
It is the most modern of the medias that allow us to really get into it. But yeah, I think it comes down to a much larger issue of mental health in general that isn't being addressed well enough, and so people find other ways.
Also, you fixed your audio,
Life finds a way.
so it's good. It's good.
So for if anyone has taking an interest in anyone speaking here and might want to see more of their work, how about we get into specifics of where exactly they can find you? Starting with you, Shado Temple, since you're leaving soon.
I'm gonna go, and then I'm literally gonna jump out of this. Yeah, I'm Shado Temple. That's without a W plus an underscore Temple, and you can find me at twitch.tv/shadow_temple. You can also find me on Twitter, where you'll then find my Twitch, and if you're on my Twitch, you'll find my Twitter. So they're connected. It works. All right, I gotta go. Bye. Thank you.
Ciao, ciao.
See ya.
Take care, Shadow.
And if you folks are lazy, the link will be in the description. Seriously.
And Alzorath, where can they find you?
YouTube.com/Alzorath. You can find me as Alzorath on Twitter and on Facebook. Good luck finding my other channels. They don't have my name in them, but I will eventually make them public as I get more subs on them.
Yeah.
Be like some
Awesome.
sort of Easter egg or something.
It's like a
Oh, there
fun
is a
map.
video of my face on the internet, but there's only one, and I can't even find it anymore.
Good to know.
Oh dear.
Alright, moral?
You folks can find me at youtube.com/moraltruth. There's no space on that. And yeah, I'm pretty much all over the place. I'm on Twitter as well, at moraltruthy. No space on that, it's just more truth, but just add the Y in the end. I'm no longer on Twitch, but I'm on Mixer. That's where I live stream games on there. So you can check me out at mixer.com/moraltruth.
He said Mixer, not Grinder, folks.
What?
You are such a sweet, innocent summer child.
Yeah, and I want to stay that way.
Do continue.
But yeah, I'm mostly there, Twitter, YouTube. Like, you guys can find my other links there. It'll be in the description as well. I'm on Instagram as well. And you can also find the website of my podcast, moralspodcast.weebly.com. That's the website. You could find, like, pretty much all the links. You can find my podcast on iTunes and Stitcher, Google Play. Yeah, and yeah, I really enjoyed this discussion of gaming and escapism because, you know, some people these days, you know, play games rather, you know, to escape from the certain situations going on in our lives, and some people play games to the extent that they forget everything else going on in their lives, and that's something, you know, that needs to be addressed, has to, you know, get the word out, you know, that this is like an issue that's still occurring.
Fair enough. Any final words?
That was my final words.
Yeah, okay. Shrimp, I'm talking about you.
Oh, no,
Final
no.
cast, man.
I was trying to think of a good meme, but my mind's drawing a blank now.
Right. So Shrimp's gonna need a job after this since he's retiring. So again, if you need someone to go and drive your getaway vehicle from any robbery, you can hit Shrimp up.
Which I do not approve of.
If you don't mind them screaming Leroy Jenkins as they drive away.
Yeah, I mean, you can consider that a perk. He's gonna be the first person they're gonna shoot. Making
Yeah,
yourself
if
a
you need to
giant
hire
heat
somebody
score.
to stop Shrimp from, you know, driving the getaway car, I'm your guy.
Oh yeah, there you go. You're just gonna employ them both. It'll be a wonderful, happy situation. And basically, if you folks enjoyed this content, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. I would love to hear back on some of you folks on your opinions towards the stuff we actually tackled in this podcast, and if there's any future things you would like to see in these podcasts. I can't speak on behalf of everyone who's actually attending the mass so far, but, you know, odds willing, it'd be nice to actually have people on board for another discussion if there was, like, a suitably enticing topic to put forward. In the meantime, thanks.
If you get pizza and beer,
I
we get
mean,
plenty of people.
I mean, true.
As long as it's boneless.
But boneless pizza?
Yeah.
Is that even an
Boneless
issue?
white
in...
food.
Oh,
God
God.
damn it.
No! I heard that.
Run!
God damn it. I'm stuck between memes. Anyways.
I heard that.
Also, if you enjoy memes like this or these types of discussions, you should probably pop into our Discord and maybe get to know us, because you might end up in one of these things if you have a lot of interesting stuff to say, or you can end up in the meme channel.
Because our memes are dank.
No, thank our memes.
Welcome to the dankest dungeon.
I actually have that soundbite.
It's so good. It's so good. Anyways, that's it, folks. So we'll catch you next time.